Well, thank you so much, Trent Cooper, for being with me today on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. You're my 98th guest. How are you today, Trent?
Man, what an honor. 98. There's 97 more important people in the world, but you think about all that are going to come after me. That's even more exciting. So
Absolutely.
thanks.
And speaking of eight, you're an eight-time Emmy Award winner as a documentary director for a lot of various sports films. And you were just telling me offline that you're going to be venturing out and doing non-sports related filming. I'm a lifelong Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like you are, and I watched a 10-part documentary series on 50 years of Bucks football, and I look forward to talking to you about that and what inspired you to want to create that series. But Trent, when you think of relationship building in a team environment, what does relationship building mean to you, and what has it meant for your professional career?
Well, with filmmaking, it's everything, right? So I get a lot of the credit for what we do, but it is such a we sport. The primary collaborators in film, you've got your director of photography. In my case, I had two of them on the Bucks, and then you've got your editor. In my case, we had six of them on the Bucks. So those are the kind of primary creative collaborators, and I mean, they are, in theory, they're bringing your vision to life, but when you're really humming and you're clicking on all cylinders, the vision becomes our vision, and we are elevating each other. And I like to say 1+1 = 7. When you get the right collaborators, things just take on a whole different shape. And I am not the only person with ideas. I'm one of several, but I also, you also, as a film director, you have to understand that you have the keys to the car. Somebody has to put the key in ignition and drive, because you can get in a situation where everybody's got so many ideas and there's so much collaborating going on that you're like stuck in neutral. So somebody has to drive the car, and that person has to have very clear direction and a vision and a backbone and a sense of purpose. But man, if you get some smart people around you that can elevate you and elevate each other, it gets fun quickly.
Yes, and you were telling me that you grew up in Lakeland, and I grew up in Naples and then moved up to the Tampa Bay area and became a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan starting in '96.
That was a great time to start being a fan. You didn't have to
Absolutely.
suffer like the rest of us.
Well,
But
I look forward to hearing your earlier experiences as a Buccaneers fan because, we're so fortunate as fans, and you being in such a privileged spot of being able to capture 50 years of Buccaneers football and bringing it to so many millions of us throughout the country and around the world, that we can say that the Bucks have won two Super Bowls, and there are still NFL teams today who haven't won one.
right.
So, growing up in Lakeland, what inspired you to want to become a filmmaker? What inspired you about the Buccaneers team and eventually creating a 10-part documentary series about the Buccaneers?
Well, the series was brought on by the fact that they were turning 50 this year. And that is a huge milestone in the life of a professional sports franchise. And their owners, the Glazer family, care deeply about history, and including the history that predated them, which is about 20 years of it. So they wanted to tell the story of the emotional journey, high, low, rise, fall, rise again, of this franchise that we all love. And they reached out to me. And we had done multiple projects together in the past, which created a trust and a friendship. But they also, I think it was important to them that they hire somebody that it would become their passion project. To me, passion goes a very long way. And if you love a story, and I always say to my team, I'm like, you have to love this story so much that you would sleep in your car and you would pay them to do it. And I think if it starts from that place, and oh, by the way, you have a little bit of talent, then some really great things can happen. So it started with a relationship with them calling me saying, hey, this is our 50th, we want to do this. How would you approach it? And how can we support you? This is the owner saying this to me. So they really wanted to sort of stay out of the way, which is what a good client does, but also hold me accountable, which is what a good client does, and create access, which they really did. I mean, we talk about interviewing exactly 100 people for this project. That's not easy to get those 100 people to agree to sit down with you. I mean, you know this, you're in the business of booking people, and they sat down for not 15 minutes, but in some cases half a day, some cases 2 days. So this is incredible access to the people that lived it and breathed it. So that's how the project began. If you want to know how I got into filmmaking, so I grew up in a town where all of the people I looked up to, my neighbors, the successful teachers, and the people in the community, many of them were educated, of course. Many of them were lawyers. Some of them were doctors, and a lot of them were engineers. And that was really the three people you looked up to in my town, and your teachers and your coaches. But no one was a filmmaker. It never even dawned on me that this could be a career. It just wasn't even on my radar. What was on my radar is how much I loved watching movies. So when I was a kid, I always say that the two things that I loved the most were football and movies. So to be able to somehow do that for a living someday was, I can't even say it was a dream because I didn't know it was a possibility. But for it to have worked out that way was pretty cool.
That's awesome. And what was the most challenging part about putting this docuseries together? Because you talk about interviewing 100 people, and although you had unlimited access, how did you schedule all of these interviews and over what period?
Yeah, so we worked on this project for about a year and a half. And scheduling, well, although it may seem really daunting, it wasn't. The Bucks were great and they handled a ton of that. And so scheduling sort of is what it is, not the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is, what do you do with all that footage? I mean, you're talking about coming home with, each Glazer gave me 10 to 12 hour interviews. So there's just a massive amount of storytelling to sift through and make sense of and to weave into a compelling story. So that is by far and away the biggest challenge. Because I would say, we might be shooting 1,000-to-1 ratio of what we're ultimately using on screen. And that also includes the archival. So as much, people think about documentary filmmaking, they think a lot about interviews. Interviews is a piece of it, and it's a driving force of it. But the visuals and the archival is so much more. So you can imagine 50 years of football games. One great game, you could do an entire episode on just the NFC Championship in 2002, and it would be compelling as hell. We'd watch that whole episode and love it. So really whittling it down, making the hard choices, and did a lot of that, obviously, with my team. Ed Glazer was very involved as an executive producer. It was a great teammate and collaborator, and we would bounce a lot of ideas off each other. But ultimately, figuring out what the most emotional stories are is the job.
Yeah, and it's pretty remarkable that there was someone out there, and thankfully you, to capture 50 years of Buccaneers football, because if it wasn't you, who else would it be? It'd have to have been someone as accomplished as you, someone who was as passionate as you, and somebody who just growing up, eat, live, and breathe Buccaneers football like me. And so were there other people in the industry who wanted to capture that story, or was it just you because they had reached out to you?
Listen, I think I'm lucky in that regard, and I've known that family for almost the entire time they've owned the team. And a lot of people don't know this, but one of my first big projects as a young filmmaker was right when they bought the team. I mean, this is right around the time you were becoming a fan. So they were getting the new stadium. This is a year or two after they bought the team. The new stadium was being built. They were changing the uniforms. The team was finally starting to win. So there was a major transformation happening, and they hired myself and this company, this Tampa company that I was working for, to create their big marketing film that would help them sell the new stadium. So this was a huge project for me as a 26-year-old or 25-year-old young filmmaker. So what you're describing, there are a million people that could have done this project. By the way, the in-house production team with the Bucks is amazing. They're like the best in the NFL at what they do. There are a lot of people that could have done it. I think the reason the Glazers hired me is we have this collective history. We have this trust. And they know that I was going to put my entire heart into it. I think that's why they hired me. But that relationship started, I think, in 1997 with that one project. And I love to tell this part of the story. So Ed Glazer, who's my same age, had just moved to town. His father and his family had bought the team. And he wasn't so much in the mix that first year or two because he hadn't moved to Tampa yet. But right when he moved to town, his father said, "Hey, there's this new project that we're working on, this marketing film, and I want you to be in charge of it. I want you to oversee this filmmaker." So he and I were the same age and being tasked with this same very big project at the same time, almost 30 years ago. And then 30 years later, we did this one together, which is pretty cool, full circle for both of us.
Yes, I love those full circle moments, and you reflect on those times fondly, and I'm sure you're so proud of it. And I'm sure that
I really am. Thank you for saying that. I am very, very proud of it. Yeah. Thank you.
you're very welcome. And what allowed you to say to yourself, okay, I can tell the story in so many different ways, but based upon all this footage, based upon all of the interviews, and I would love to know the people who are the former players who you enjoyed interviewing the most. But when you were telling this compelling story, what angles were you trying to choose from? Were you vacillating back and forth with how do I want to tell the Buccaneers story of 50 years? Love to know your insight.
So a lot of my professional background is in narrative filmmaking, Hollywood, screenwriting, all of that. So when you work as a screenwriter, you learn classic structure of storytelling, and it is beaten into your brain and it becomes like breathing. You understand the emotional roller coaster, the highs and the lows. You understand the character arcs. You understand that when the big moments have to change people and change the story, you understand theme. That's not necessarily the same thing that most documentary filmmakers, and certainly not journalists, they don't study narrative film the way I did. So I bring that sensibility to the doc world, and I look through it at everything through that lens. So it's one of the things that makes my work separate from other people. But it also informs this project, right? So you have to say, hey, you're a lifelong Bucs fan. That means nothing. There's 1 million lifelong Bucs fans in the world that have no business trying to tackle a monster like this 10 episode thing. So you almost have to check that at the door. You use it as passion and you use it as a knowledge base for what I'm about to explain next. And that is the number one criteria when you're sifting through trying to figure out what the story is. Where do I feel the most? What moments make me tingle, give me goosebumps, make me cry? I mean, grab every one of those moments and put them in a bucket because we want to figure out how to arrange those a certain way. And then I go back to like classic storytelling and classic screenwriting structure. And you can see that this particular franchise, a lot of it naturally falls into that way. Like you have the excitement of this small market getting an NFL franchise. How exciting is that? That's a high. And then the low of, oh my God, we're terrible. And we lose our first 26 games in a row. So much so that we're the laughing stock of pop culture. The entire country, Johnny Carson is making jokes about us every night. We are an international laughing stock. Well, that's pretty low. And then all of a sudden, we put it together, and here comes Doug Williams. And here comes this massive defense that they had been putting together all along. And here comes the high, and we think we're going to be great. And we almost make it to the Super Bowl. And then management decides they're not going to pay Doug, and everything falls apart, and we go lower. I always say this, it's kind of like golf. If you've ever played golf and had a pretty good round, you know what it feels like to shoot a 79 or 82 or something. And when you blow up and can't break 100, it's torture. And that's what happens to the Bucs for 10 or 15 years. They can't do a thing. They're worse than, even though 0-26 was terrible, something about that next 10 years was even worse. And it wasn't 10, it was 14 years of double-digit losses. It just hurt so bad. So what's happening here is the natural highs and lows of narrative film are baked into the Bucs story. And it's one of the reasons why if you honor that, and you know how to recognize that, you really can't miss. This is one of the great inspirational underdog stories in all of sports. And we just needed to kind of get it on the rails and find those moments and bring them to life visually.
I totally agree with you. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Buccaneers fan too, or that I'm being biased, but I know Alex Michelson at CNN, and one of the questions he asked you, and you had Gerald McCoy next to you, one of the all-time great Bucs, 6-time Pro Bowler. He said, why the Buccaneers? I believe that was his question. But to everything that you just said just moments ago is why, because
it's a great story.
It's an amazing story, right? It's a great story. And do you feel that if Tom Brady didn't come to the Bucs, that documentary that you directed and brought to life, that it wouldn't have had the same impact, only because although we had Tony Dungy, although we had John Gruden won the first Super Bowl, Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks.
It's the last act of a great story. So if you ever watch like a Saturday Night Live sketch, and you're like, oh my God, this is a great premise for a sketch. And oh my God, you got to see this. They're doing the blah, blah, blah. And then something amazing happens. Oh, this is so great. And then it just kind of flatlines and it doesn't really finish strong. I think that would have happened had we not had the Brady era Super Bowl. Like, that gives you that third act big finish that every great movie needs to have. And in our series, if you think about, how many episodes are devoted to what, Tom is part of 2.5 of the last 3 episodes. And that really changes the story, elevates the story, brings it all home. It builds on what we saw and what we felt in the Dungy Gruden era. And I jokingly said to you, you've never suffered as a Bucs fan, but you have. I mean, after they won it with Gruden, we went into the wilderness for another decade. And it's lonely out there, man. It's tough. I mean, listen, we just went 8-9, and you'd think we went 2-15. I mean, it's lonely when you're not winning Super Bowls, making it to the NFC Championship, winning playoff games. It gets gnarly. So, but Tom's era made this complete.
Absolutely. And he gets featured in the very beginning, which is like that hook to watch the full 10 episodes. He makes that brief appearance in the beginning, and then it goes right into the history of the franchise. But no, I also think about the 99 NFC Championship game, the Burt Emanuel catch that was a no catch, and then they deemed it the Burt Emanuel rule. That changed the way wide receivers catch footballs. And as long as they have, full, complete possession, it's okay if the ball touches the ground. You just have to know and understand and the context of that play of hand placement, right? And then I think about Gruden's last year as a head coach. We were 9-3, but then we lose the last 4 games and go 9-7 and miss the playoffs. And then Coach Gruden gets fired. And those first 12 games of the 2008 season, I mean, we were playing really well. And then for whatever reason, the last 4 games, we just had to win, I believe, one of those 4 to get into the playoffs, and we just couldn't. And so from that point, when Coach Gruden departed, and then really just going through a lot of different transitions, and it really wasn't until, as you know very well, until we got Coach Bruce Arians that changed everything. And then getting Tom a year later after Jameis Winston, unbelievable season to throw 33 touchdowns, but then throw 30 interceptions and still throw 5,109 yards. And you're like, wow, he's statistically the least popular, or it's the worst 5,000 plus yard season in all of football if you look at it statistically, because to throw 33 touchdowns but 30 interceptions is just mind-boggling. But we all know that some of those were not Jameis's fault, but it was just a very interesting, and that leads to the Brady era. But when you think of all of your work, even leading up to that documentary, talking about your other projects, I was researching them, and very diverse. I love the one where former American football players fighting on the front lines in Ukraine with everything going on between Russia and Ukraine. Tell me about that.
So I used to work at the NFL for almost 10 years, and they put me in charge of a show called NFL 360. NFL 360 was designed to uncover and tell the great human stories in sports, and specifically with the backdrop of football, but it never had anything to do with X's and O's or winning football games. It was always about the human beings and people going through incredible things and the transformations that happen as a result. So part of being part of that show, and I was the showrunner and creative director, and every year we would go through development season where we were picking our stories, and it was really intense. I mean, 15, 20 people would be pitching all of their passion projects, stuff they've been researching and developing for months and maybe over a year, and you only had the money to do a few of them. Right. So we were very precious about what we greenlit, but we always wanted to tackle something that was like the biggest story in the world at the time, and how we could find a very specific way in, unique lens into that big story. And at the time, and it still is one of the biggest stories of our time, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine and how that was completely impacting that side of the globe. And, there's a lot of injustice there that I think a lot of us felt. And, we're like, geez, is there any way into this story? And lo and behold, there's a league called the Ukraine League of American Football Players. So apparently American football, very popular in Ukraine. And there's this whole subculture there, and they sell tickets, and they have cheerleaders, and they have stadiums and all this stuff, and it's the same football we play, 11-on-11, tackle. And some of the players are from America, but most of them aren't. Most of them are Ukrainian men, and they play this sport very passionately. So when that invasion happened overnight, that league disbanded because everybody went to war. And you're talking about a lot of people who had never been a trained soldier. They'd never been in the military. Some of them never shot a gun before. And they're turning in their football pads, grabbing a rifle, and going to fight. And they're fighting for their freedom, their family's freedom, their children, the generations that will follow them. Many of the women and children were moved to neighboring countries, and the men were on those front lines. So we figured out how to create a relationship with some of them. And Kyle Brandt from Good Morning Football, who was my partner on that, we realized very quickly we can't call these people. They're on the front lines fighting them. Many of them are like in dug foxholes sitting there with guns. So the only way we could communicate with them was through little videos we would make and text them on our iPhones. So Kyle would text them 90 seconds of questions. Tell me what's going on in your life right now. Where's your how's your family? What are you experiencing daily? And then he would shut up and he would send this text video, and then you would hope you'd get a response. And you may wait a day, you may wait a month. You don't know if your new friend on the other side has died in combat. We had 4 guys that were following. We ended up losing one of the 4, which was super tragic. And I still think about it almost every day. But waiting to get back those videos was so intense. And when you would finally get one back, you're like, oh, we got one. First of all, you were thrilled that your new friend was still alive, and then you were dying to hear what they would say. And then you were really curious where the hell they were and what was behind them. And these dudes were literally in tunnels and holes and stuff with like bombs going off behind them while they're sending us videos. And it was, man, what a project. And Kyle did an amazing job. And we met some people that I'll never forget. And we also involved the Bucks in that. This was part of that 30-year relationship. Tom Brady, in the end, was part of it because he was able to reach out to the families of these guys and invite them to a game and show them some love. And yeah, it was one of my favorite all-time projects. And we had so many of them there at 360. It was like a weirdly, the budgets were low by comparison to, Netflix and ESPN and some of the other people we're competing with, but the autonomy was sky high. No one was going to tell us no. My boss and I kind of had carte blanche to tell whatever story we felt passionate about. And I think getting those reps really prepared me for life after the NFL. And it kind of reminds me that whatever project you take, at least in my business, and maybe in many, you just got to be passionate about it because you're going to put your whole heart into it for a couple of years. And if you're taking a job for the paycheck, or you're taking it because somebody told you to do it, or you think it's what you're supposed to do, you're going to run out of steam really quick. And we never run out of steam because we love what we do so much.
And because it's a relationship building and human environment podcast, I mean, relationship building is essential if what you do in the film industry and directing. And I recently interviewed Rhoda Griffiths, who's a Hollywood actress based in Atlanta. And when we were talking about relationship building, she said that it's the relationship building with her directors. She loves working with directors.
Yeah.
It seems to me that for you as a director, you love working with the talent. And one of my previous questions was, who were your favorite people to interview with the Bucks documentary? And who in general, when you look at all the other work that you've done and won awards, won Emmy Awards, like who were those people that you enjoyed interviewing the most?
Yeah, what a great question. I kind of like all of them because I just like talking to people. I mean, the conversation you and I are having right now is fun. Like the process of asking questions and really listening to what they're saying is a skill that I've been forced to develop through the years. And when you do that, it's just so cool. I mean, you're starting to understand, we talk a lot about getting to understand somebody's why, like what drives them, who they're playing for, why they need to win, why they need this to work out. And what happens when you're learning that why, you're seeing yourself in that other person's story a little bit. And I think that that's a very transformative moment for both sides of the conversation. You're saying, oh my God, you and I are a lot alike. And we grew up in totally different places or whatever, but we have the same shared experience, or we care about the same things, or we're inspired by the same thing. Whatever it is, you're connecting through story. So I love that. And if you say, who are my favorites on this project, I always start with John Gruden because I felt like I've always been very entertained by John and thought he was cool, I never saw him be vulnerable until this interview. And for whatever reason, that day, he just decided he was going to trust me in this process. And he took us on the whole journey. And it was, at times, it was soul crushing and sad. At times, it had fire and intensity and comedy and anger and joy and fist pumping. Like, I just saw the entire human experience in one interview. And also, he happens to be a tremendous storyteller, which is super fun. And that's really true of a lot of the projects. So we talk a lot about this project as having such a great story baked in, but it also has these incredible characters baked in. And these are people that have extraordinary personalities. They're great storytellers. There's a reason why so many former Buccaneers are on television, because they're just awesome storytellers. So, I'm sitting there with Steve Young, and a lot of people don't even remember Steve Young was on our team, let alone our quarterback, and his stories are unreal. And I could listen for hours, and I have the biggest smile on my face. I mean, you mentioned Gerald McCoy the other night. Gerald is a guy who, went to 6 Pro Bowls. He was All-Pro 3 times. He was the best player on a shitty team for 10 years. And maybe he doesn't wear a gold jacket someday. Maybe he does. I know his name's mentioned sometimes, but he didn't get to taste the playoffs, let alone a Super Bowl. And yet, he's such a great storyteller that he's one of the rising stars in sports journalism right now. He's one of the hosts of Game Day Morning on NFL Network with Rich Eisen, Kurt Warner, and Steve Mariucci. I mean, that's a big job. Like, he took over Michael Irvin's seat, and he's killing it. And that's just one example. You got guys like Keyshawn who are out in the world telling great stories, and that personality is leaping off the screen. You've got, obviously, Gronk and Brady. Don't forget Warren Sapp, who is... every second he's on camera in this documentary, you're riveted because you just can't believe how compelling the guy is. And there's 40 more of them. So I had to pick my favorite. I'd probably say Gruden just because of his vulnerability and a guy that you don't really expect it from. Second favorite, maybe Doug Williams, just because he was my first hero. And I just kept being blown away by how little I knew about him, and what a true hero he was and is, and how many lives he's changed and impacted through the years. And I just felt really lucky to be meeting him, let alone working with him. Mike Allstott's another one where, Mike is maybe not as charismatic as some of these other guys, but the warmth and authenticity and the heart that he exhibits, no wonder he was so good at football. Like, his whole heart is in every single thing he does, whether he's doing an interview or talking to kids or running the ball into the end zone from the 8-yard line. Like, his entire heart is in, and he wears it on his sleeve, and it's super compelling. Brooks, God, Rondé. I mean, they're all just fantastic dudes. But maybe Gruden was my favorite interview.
That's awesome. My sister met John Gruden years ago after he won the Super Bowl. I've met Warren Sapp. I've met Rondé Barber. I've met Ernest Graham, Corey Ivy, Dexter Jackson. John Lynch spoke at my high school at our assembly hall right after 2003 season, and prior to him moving on to the Denver Broncos. I've met Michael Pittman. I mean, the list goes on. And, that's just the benefit of having grown up in the Tampa Bay area and having the opportunity to meet people you watched every Sunday. And then, as a young kid growing up, even into my teen years, it just comes to life when you meet athletes. But I've met a lot of athletes. I've met Carmelo Anthony and Michael Jordan and Larry Fitzgerald and Chris Paul. And when I think of The Last Dance and that documentary, every time I watched an episode of Raise the Flags, I was thinking of Last Dance because I saw a lot of similarities of how it was structured and how it was narrated, and all access interviews with all the huge superstars, right? And the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
I didn't know if you thought, this is interesting, The Last Dance. It's similar to Raise the Flags. Or did you, in creating Raise the Flags, thought of documentaries like The Last Dance?
Well, I think we're all thinking about it because everyone loved it so much. So it's one of the gold standards right now in our industry. And I think part of why we loved it, and you could argue, hey, did I love the way it was shot, or did I like the music? All the little details of it are sort of irrelevant. It's what was the takeaway? What did you feel, right? So I think we saw a side of Michael Jordan we didn't know. and he let us into a world we didn't know. And some combination of his vulnerability and the depth of that storytelling with how new and amazing that archival footage was. Holy God, they followed him around in the 6th season and they had this footage that no one had ever seen. So boy, are you being led into a world that you loved. And this is sort of the sweet spot with sports docs. It has to be something, this thing that you loved or you knew about. And it lives in the back of your mind as this thing. Oh yeah, God, I miss the old Michael Jordan days. And I remember seeing all of that. But either you can't remember or you never knew the real story or the depth of it. And then these sports docs will take you deep inside this thing that you used to love, and it reawakens stuff, and you're immediately transported into, 1995 or whatever year it was when Jordan was playing for his last, I can't remember what year it was, but
1998.
Was it 98? Yeah, you're right back there. You're in that sports bar and you're seeing him do these incredible things and you remember, and then are they going to do it again? But then when you hear the torture that he goes through being Michael Jordan and the obsession, we talk a lot about the gift being the curse, that this is the most competitive human being maybe that's ever walked the earth, right? So it's torture for him on a Tuesday night at what would seem like a meaningless practice. It's torture to look across and see one of his teammates not going 150 miles an hour because he knows it's going to take that to win. And that torture makes him pick a fight and be an asshole to Steve Kerr, who's the sweetest, loveliest guy in the world. So you look at Michael Jordan, you go, they're revealing this sort of asshole side of him, but you're seeing that it's born out of that competitive obsession. It's the same stuff that we see with Vince Lombardi, like Kobe had it. A lot of the greats, Brady definitely has it. So yeah, to me, that's when a sports doc is really firing on all cylinders. When you're taking us back to this thing that we sort of remember loving fondly, you're taking us deeper. And then when you add some artistry to it and some craft, and I think there's a lot of craft going on in the Bucks doc. I mean, people are saying some of the best sound design they've ever heard in a sports doc. I mean, who thinks of sports docs being known for sound design? But man, it is banging. Like when you watch this documentary, make sure you're in your home theater with all the speakers going. You're going to feel it deeply. There's some great photography. Some of the best editing I've seen in our industry is going on in that doc. So craft is a big part of it, revealing stuff that they've never known or seen before, and then just emotional depth.
Yeah, I love the documentary, The Last Dance, but I also love yours, Raise the Flags. And I believe it's okay to say that I have two number one favorite sports documentaries, The Last Dance and Raise the Flags, but for different reasons. And one's basketball, one's focused on Michael Jordan and his supporting cast, but one, as yours, is focused on a professional franchise over 5 decades. So, and yours is in its own category of greatness. It's legendary. And 50 years from now, people will be watching it the way that they've watched it in recent weeks because I love it so much. And I'm so thankful that you created that. And I couldn't stop watching it, and I finished it over the course of 3-4 days. So last few questions before we depart from our interview. I recently interviewed Drew Bledsoe on my podcast, and you had mentioned to me that you're really good friends with the doctor who saved his life. Tell me about your friendship with him and tell me about what you know about that time.
Here's what I know. Having worked at the NFL and worked for NFL 360 for a long time, I never personally worked with Bledsoe, but some of my colleagues did, and he's known as one of the great guys in our industry. So he's just a good dude with a lot to offer the world, and his story is very interesting. And he was the best quarterback around, and rightfully so. And then, this injury really messed him up. And along comes this kid from Michigan they took in the 6th round and never looked back and became Tom Brady. But yeah, the thing that Drew and I share in common, though we've never met, one of my best friends is Dave Berger. He was the team doctor for the Patriots at the time, but he's also a world-renowned surgeon and focuses mostly on abdominal stuff and things that are happening here. So he was all over that. He was there that night, and I wasn't there, but my understanding is he's the surgeon that saved his life, and I'm glad he did because Bledsoe's a good dude. He also helped save my son. The reason I know him is our two sons played on the same college baseball team for Harvard, and my son was involved in a collision his senior year, which was just last year, and he took a cleat in the leg, and he had this massive gash like crazy deep. And we just happened to have the greatest surgeon in the world, like right next to us. And they rushed him off to Mass General and they stitched him up and he didn't even miss a game. And I just, there's nothing like a great doctor. In fact, getting back to Raise the Flags, there's a great story of when Chris Sims almost died from a ruptured spleen. And, you got these team doctors going, he's talking about this incredible pain he feels. And he's just, you better have your spleen checked. Who thinks to check a spleen? I don't even know what a spleen is. And 10 minutes later, he's on an operating bed across from the stadium with his life on the line. And the doctor that saved his life that night is somebody that we should shout out. Like, it's a tough business. And thank God there are people like this Dave Berger friend of mine and the guy that saved Chris's life. But yeah, just cool stories. And thank God they had happy endings.
Yes, thank God for Drew and thank God for Chris that they were able to recover from their injuries. And I'm happy to reconnect you with Drew via email. He'll be very happy to hear from you. And what projects are you excited about now and looking into the future? And then the last question I have is any final words about relationship building and team environment that mean so much to you that you would like to share with my audience and me before we depart from our interview?
The bummer about my business is I have these gag orders. I'm not allowed to talk about these projects I'm on because they haven't been announced yet. But I'm working on another big football doc on another team. It's big. It has an extraordinary history and nostalgia and mystique and all the things that you would hope from a football doc. And I'm also starting my first doc in the music space, which is incredibly exciting to me personally. And it's rooted in New York City and it's where I live now. So it's very personal to me. So I've got those two, but as soon as I can talk about them, I will, but I just can't yet. I said to you early in this conversation that I never knew that being a film director or a filmmaker was even an option as a career path. And I discovered it 5 years after college and I kind of backed into it and I've never looked back. But the essence of it is team. So whatever skill that I was learning as a crappy backup quarterback in high school, I jokingly say I played Division III tight end, third string, quarterback, sales, whatever. It always comes back to how can you form a team? How can you get on the same page? And how can you elevate everyone around you so that you're all doing something better than you could alone? And, when you get all Buddhist about it, people talk about it's not about winning awards and destination, it's about process. For me, just getting a group to mobilize and be better than they ever could have been is the greatest part of my job. I did a phone call yesterday. This is a great one to end on. Yesterday, I got a call from a kid who worked on the Bucks doc, and we probably had 30 people in post working. And his job was he was a story producer, but he was more of a supporting role in our archival department. So you're never going to see this guy's name. He's in the credits, but you just don't think to, right? But he probably worked 60, 70-hour weeks for a year. I mean, he put everything he could into this. And I haven't talked to him since we finished. It's been 3 or 4 months. And he's calling to kind of check in and see what's going on. And he said to me 2 things. He said, one, he's still recovering from that project, which ended 3 months ago. And my first thought was, oh gosh, I hope I didn't kill this kid. But he's talking about it as the greatest experience of his professional career because of how hard he worked, how much he loved it, and what we were able to do together. And in his mind, he's never going to have a project that cool ever again. And this is a guy who was working 60, 70-hour weeks. He's not saying it sucked and I'm burned out. He's saying, when can I do it again? It was the best experience of my life. And that's what team can do if you get it right. And it's not easy to get it right. You got to get the right people and the right leadership and circumstances. But when you get it right, team can really elevate all of us in whatever business you're in.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom. And it's such a great example. It's such a applicable example because as I always say, relationship building is the essence of humanity. And when you know that people have to work so hard at their craft, but they love it, it doesn't feel like work because they love it. And 60, 70 hours and you're one of the last people are thinking of, but because it was the greatest experience or the greatest project he worked on, he would sacrifice all that time and time again to work with amazing and
Right.
incredible directors like you. So that's kudos to you for impacting his life. And I'm sure he impacted your life too. But I want to thank you again for being my 98th guest on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. 8-time Emmy Award winning director, Trent Cooper. Thank you so much again for your time. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. What a pleasure. I really appreciate it, man. Good luck to you. Thank you.
You take care, and I look forward to staying in touch.
You bet. All right. See you, Garrett. Take care.
Take care, Trent. Bye-bye.